Thank you for extending that warm welcome to Congressman Lewis. I'm Jean McCormick, and I have the great privilege of being the president of the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for the United States Senate. And we are delighted to welcome you here tonight for the second of our Getting to the Point series. Getting to the Point is about the talk, and it's about getting to Columbia Point for all of you who are from the neighborhood. All of you are our special guests tonight, and we're thrilled that you will be able to be part of this dialogue of Congressman Lewis and Adrienne Walker from the Globe. All of you are special, but I do want to acknowledge that we have with us a lot of our elected officials, particularly from the Massachusetts House of Representatives and from the City Council. And we're delighted to have all of you here, and Mrs. Kennedy will acknowledge some of our national elected figures, officials that are here as well. You know, Senator Kennedy believed that the U.S. Senate had the power to change the world. He believed in public service and in the power of elected office to make a difference in people's lives. And he wanted people to love government as much as he did, a challenge these days. So he did envision, and he did get to see this gleaming building out here on Columbia Point, anchored by this room, which is an exact replica of the United States Senate chamber, where everyone, from students to seniors, get to negotiate, to debate, and ultimately vote on the issue of the day. We were fortunate that we made his dream a reality on March 30th when we opened our doors. And a day like today, where we also get to convene people to talk about important issues of our time, makes us really celebrate. Earlier this afternoon, a group of young people, some who are in this room today, had a chance to meet with Congressman Lewis and to hear about his journey. These kinds of events where people get to see themselves and to connect with people that they've seen from a distance or seen in a movie and understand what it takes to be a committed citizen of the United States and to make things better are what we're all about here. It's especially meaningful for me as a former teacher and a chancellor of a university to be part of this great educational experience. It wouldn't have happened, however, without the hard work of many people. And I have the pleasure of introducing Victoria Reggie Kennedy, someone who in Massachusetts we all know well. She is the co-founder, helping to shape the initial vision of the Institute alongside Senator Kennedy himself and Ed Schlossberg, the great designer of this place. She has worked tirelessly. She had no blueprint for what such an institute would be, and she made it into something that's really one of a kind. She has will and intelligence and grace, and she has been an inspiration to everyone who has been part of the path to get here. So it's my privilege to introduce her to you as a leader at the Institute, as a partner in our programs, and as a good friend. Victoria Reggie.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jean McCormick. Thank you, President Jean McCormick, for those wonderful, warm words of introduction. Thank you for your leadership here at the Institute and all you do to help to bring Teddy's vision alive. Good evening to all of you. It is my great pleasure to also welcome you to the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for the United States Senate. I also see President of the University of Massachusetts, Marty Meehan. Marty, it is so wonderful to have you here with us. Thank you so much. And Marty is also a member of our board here at the Institute. It's wonderful to have Congressman Jim McGovern and Congresswoman Catherine Clark here with us as well. I believe that Senator Paul Kirk and Senator Mo Cowan are here as well this evening, and it's wonderful to have them. We conceived and created the Edward M. Kennedy Institute to showcase the important role of the United States Senate in our system of government and to encourage people to be more active citizens. Our mission is to help visitors understand what it means to be a legislator, what it means to be entrusted with addressing the great challenges facing our nation, what it means to have the power to have a positive impact on the lives of people in this country and around the world. And in the process, we hope to inspire new generations of Americans to get involved in the life of our country. This evening, in our Getting to the Point series, our honored guest has actually lived the mission of this institute. He is a consummate legislator, and in both public and private life has personally tackled the great challenges facing our nation and has had a positive impact on the lives of men and women in this country and indeed around the world. And he has most certainly inspired new generations of Americans to get involved in the life of our country. This year, we commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act and the 50th anniversary of the marches from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama, that raised the conscience of a nation. Our distinguished guest not only was a central figure in those battles then, but he also continues to be a drum major for justice now. We are so honored by his presence this evening. His has been a defining American life in an America he has helped to redefine, to lift closer to the mountaintop of liberty and justice for all. With the light of his faith, the force of his conviction, the power of nonviolence, even as a young man, he was one of those rare individuals who bent history itself. Our special guest this evening was arrested 40 times, beaten, spat upon, and then in 1965, at that march he led in Selma, nearly lost his life so that the nation could live free. His skull was fractured, and he thought he saw death, but he was not deterred. His leadership, his bravery, helped summon the nation's soul. America rose up. There were marches in 80 cities across the land, and the marchers sang the anthem heard just before this leader was clubbed down. The early springtime air vibrated with the hymn and the hope that we shall overcome. Afterwards, the President of the United States uttered these words, and as Congress and the country and the whole world watched in wonder. And a young senator named Ted Kennedy joined with others in the forefront of the fight to pass the Voting Rights Act. It was a fight won then that Teddy would make again and again, and his friend, our honored guest, would be at his side, both before and after he went to Congress in 1986. They stood together to bring down the walls of apartheid by imposing sanctions against the reign of racism in South Africa. They led the way together to raising the minimum wage and opening the doors to college and toward health care as a right and not a privilege. And all through the years, the good and brave man who had marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge has ever since crossed new frontiers of freedom to punish hate crimes, to guarantee equal pay for women, to end discrimination against gay Americans, to fulfill in our time the ancient command of Isaiah to undo the heavy burdens and let the oppressed go free. My husband once said that there was no one in public life that he admired more than this man, not only for his achievements, but for his character. Of all those who have received the John F. Kennedy Profiles in Courage Awards, no one more powerfully exemplifies both moral and physical courage. Many are elected to high office, but no one elected this man to change history, only his conscience, and so he has. Across the decades, he has held his country to its truth and held the light of truth up to our country. He has walked with the wind and fearlessly against it, and he has marked out a path for America towards what he calls the beloved community. You are about to hear from him now, someone who is the personification of grace, a great man who has graced our history and our lives. It is my privilege and honor to introduce him now, my friend, a national hero, and a national treasure, the Congressman from the state of Georgia, John Lewis. Just sit right there. Thank you. Thank you. We are so fortunate. We are so fortunate that Congressman Lewis will be interviewed this evening by the outstanding Boston Globe columnist, Adrian Walker. Thank you very much.
Okay. Congressman, as we've already heard tonight, you're a key part of the history of the Voting Rights Act in this country, which we're here to discuss. And it really began with that march on the bridge, on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. Can you tell me what you remember about that day?
Well, thank you very much for the question. First of all, I'm delighted to be here. I'm honored to be here, to be in this wonderful, wonderful place, named for a great man, a good friend, Senator Edward M. Kennedy, and to be introduced or presented by my friend Vicki Kennedy, and to be here with my colleagues from the Congress, former colleague, President Marty Mann. This is almost too much. But on that day—
You've been through much more than this.
Well, you know, it's a different setting. Yes. On that day, March 7, 1965, we simply took a little walk. Yes. For many, many years, people in Selma, Alabama, and other parts of the South had tried to register to vote. In 1965, only 2.1% of blacks of voting age were registered to vote in Selma. People had to stand in unmovable lines there. There were one county between Selma and Montgomery. The county was more than 80% African American, but there was not a single registered African American voter in the county. Yes. You could only attempt to register to vote in Selma, Alabama on the first and third Mondays of each month. And when you went down to the courthouse, it was the only place. Sometimes you have to drive round trip 30, 40, or 50 miles, going to what part of the county that you lived in. And there would be someone from the sheriff's office taking down your name, taking your license plate from your automobile. People were intimidated, people were harassed. People lived in fear. So it was after the bombing of the church in Birmingham on September 15, 1963, that we intensified our efforts in Selma, Alabama. And I remember going there and getting arrested the first time just for standing in line with the people, wearing a little sign saying, "One man, one vote." You must remember that in 1963, when I spoke at the March on Washington, on August 28, 1963, I said, "One man, one vote is the African cry. It is ours too, it must be ours." So that became the rallying cry of people all over the South. So in Selma, we went there. After Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964, he said we would make the right to vote the next cause. And we selected Alabama along with the state of Mississippi. And January 18th, 1965, I remember it so well, it was my day to lead a group of people to the courthouse. Sheriff Clark was a very big man who wore a gun on one side, a nightstick on the other side. He carried an electric cat powder in his hand, and he didn't use it on cows. He wore a button on his left lapel that said never. He looked at me and he said, "John Lewis, you're an outside agitator. You're a troublemaker." And I said, "Sheriff, I may be a troublemaker, but I'm not an outsider. I grew up only 90 miles from here. We're going to stay here till these people allowed to register to vote." He arrested all of us. A few days later, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and others came to Selma, and Dr. King was arrested. Then a few days later, in a little town called Marion, Alabama, where Mrs. Martin Luther King Jr. was born, where Mrs. Andrew Young was born, the same county, Perry County, where Marion is located, Mrs. Abernathy was, Reverend Abernathy Wise was born. There was a protest there, and a young man by the name of Jimmy Lee Jackson was shot and killed when he tried to protect his mother. So we made a decision, because of what had happened, to march from Selma to Montgomery. So March 7, 1965, about 600 of us after church conducted a nonviolent workshop. We lined up in twos in an orderly, peaceful fashion to walk the 50 miles from Selma to Montgomery, to dramatize the fact that people wanted to register to vote. I had all of my hair there. I was a few pounds lighter. I was wearing a backpack and a light trench coat. In that backpack, I had 2 books. I thought we were going to get arrested and go to jail, so I wanted to have something to read. I had 1 apple and 1 orange. I wanted to have something to eat. Now, 1 apple and 1 orange wouldn't last that long. Had toothpaste and toothbrush. Since I thought I was going to be in jail with my friends, my colleagues, and neighbors, I wanted to be able to brush my teeth. We started walking across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Jose Williams from Dr. King organization said to me, "John, can you swim?" I said, "No." "Can you swim?" He said, "Yes, a little." I said, "Well, there's too much water down there. We're not going to jump. We're going straight ahead." And we start walking, picking them up, putting them down slowly. We come to the highest point on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, crossing the Alabama River. Down below, we saw a sea of blue, Alabama State Troopers. And behind the state troopers were Sheriff Clark deputies, all these guys on horseback, brown khaki. And within hearing distance, we heard the major say, "I'm Major John Cloud of the Alabama State Troopers. This is an unlawful march. It will not be allowed to continue. I give you 3 minutes to disperse and return to your homes or to your church." And Jose Williams said, "Major, give us a moment to kneel and pray." And I said, "Major, may I have a word?" He said, "There'll be no word." He said, "Troopers, advance." And you saw these men putting on their gas masks. They came toward us, beating us with nightsticks, trampling us with horses, and releasing the tear gas. I was hit in the head by a state trooper with a nightstick. My legs went from under me, and I fell to the ground. I thought I saw death. I thought I was going to die. 50 years later, I don't recall how I made it back across that bridge to the little church that we had left from. And I somehow someone carried me back, but I was there. They asked me to say something. And I stood up and said something like, I don't understand it, how President Johnson can send troops to Vietnam, but cannot send troops to Selma, Alabama to protect people who only desires to register to vote. And a few minutes later, 17 of us was taken to a hospital where a group of nuns took care of us. Sisters of St. Joseph.
Wow. What happened the next week?
Well, I was hospitalized with others, and on that Monday, that would have been March 8th, Monday morning, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. came by to visit us. And he said to me, John, everything going to be okay? Said, I made a request. I issued a call for religious leaders to come to Selma. And on Tuesday, March 9th, more than 1,000 ministers, priests, rabbis, and nuns came from all across America to march across the bridge. And that evening, they made a decision not to violate a federal court order. They would get up and return to the church, and we would go into court and get an order allowing us to march. And I went to Montgomery for a whole week, almost every day, to testify or to be there. But that Tuesday night, March 9th, 3 young ministers, one from Boston,
Yes.
Reverend James Reed, went out to try to get something to eat. They were attacked by a group, members of the Klan. They were beaten, left bloody. Reverend James Reed was so seriously hurt, he was rushed to a hospital in Birmingham, where he died. But we didn't give up. We got an order from the court saying that we had a right to march. A judge named Frank M. Johnson, he was appointed to the bench. He was very, very young. He had been a classmate in law school with Governor Wallace. He had done so much to desegregate the state of Alabama. He said we had a right to march. And he laid out the prescription, the order that 300 of us could march all the way and on one side of a 4-lane highway. And by the time we got to Montgomery, the day that we left, on Sunday, March the 21st, there was more than 10,000 people walking with us. By the time we reached Montgomery, there were more than 30,000 people walking. People came from all across America.
It's now thought of as the turning point in the movement.
I think Selma represented one of the finest hours, and it was a turning point in the movement. After Bloody Sunday, things were so peaceful, so orderly. There were young children, there were ministers, other religious leaders, priests, rabbis, and nuns who walked all the way. There was a little town, a little city called a community called St. Jude. It's a Catholic hospital that treated African Americans, took care of people, allowed us to camp out the night before we walked into Montgomery. And a lot of people came from all across America. Peter, Paul, and Mary. So many folks came to perform, to encourage people. And it seemed like the wind was at our back, that we were on our way. And we made it there. But I should go back for a moment. Oh, 8 days after Bloody Sunday, Lyndon Johnson spoke. I think Mrs. Kennedy mentioned his speech. Lyndon Johnson spoke to a joint session of the Congress. And I was in the home with Dr. King watching and listening to Lyndon Johnson when he introduced the Voting Rights Act. And at one point near the end of the speech, he said, "And we shall overcome."
Yes.
Tears came down his face. He started crying. I looked at him and I started crying. That was the first time I heard an American president say, "And we shall overcome." to use the theme song of the Civil Rights Movement. We knew then, and Dr. King said to me, we will make it from Selma to Montgomery. And he was right, and the Voting Rights Act would be passed.
Before Selma, Johnson wasn't so sure a Voting Rights Act was needed. Is that right?
Well, he had said that he had just signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, that we didn't have the votes in the Congress to get a Voting Rights Act passed. But he also said, if you want it, make me do it. And I think we did what we could to dramatize the issue, to dramatize the need for a Voting Rights Act. It was Selma, but it was more than Selma. It was other parts of Alabama. It was Mississippi. It was the whole South. People lived in fear. They thought their homes would be bombed. Their churches would be bombed. They would be evicted from the plantation, from the farm. My own mother, my own father, my uncles and aunts couldn't become a registered voter until after the Voting Rights Act was passed and signed into law on August 6, 1965.
Wow. Just last month, you filed legislation to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act. Can you talk about why that's needed and what the new bill would do?
Well, the law is needed. There's several different pieces that have been introduced. It is to fix what the Supreme Court said we needed to fix. When the court made that ruling, it was like putting a dagger in the very heart of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. When I heard about that decision, I felt like crying, but I couldn't cry. We would make it simple. We would make it easy. But after the Supreme Court decision came down, you had several states. You had Texas. You had North Carolina. Had places in Mississippi and Alabama and other parts of the South limited early voting hour.
They say they've changed and they don't need it anymore. They're not the people they were in 1965. Why do we still need a Voting Rights Act?
Well, we made changes. We made some changes. We made a lot of progress. But we're not there yet. People make it harder, more difficult for senior citizens, for students, for young people, for minorities. I take the position that the vote is precious. It's almost sacred. It is the most powerful, nonviolent instrument or tool we have in a democratic society. And we should make it simple and easy. Open up the political process. Let everybody come in. And be not afraid. Embrace the changes that are taking place in America.
Are you surprised that 50 years later there's still opposition to opening up voting and to making it as easy as possible?
I am
fundamental.
I am to some degree, because there are forces in our country want us to stand still or go back. But we cannot go back. We made too much progress. We got to go forward. If it hadn't been for the Voting Rights Act of 1965, I doubt whether President Bill Clinton would have been elected, either President Carter or President Obama. Just open it up. Make it simple. Make it easy. In this stage of new technology, we should be able to allow people to register online. And I believe a vote in Oregon, I believe people are voting by mail. Just make it simple. Let the people decide. We shouldn't be afraid as a nation and as a people.
Why don't more people vote?
Well, I think that some people feel that their vote wouldn't matter, that it doesn't matter. But every vote counts. We have to convince the electorate that every vote is important. And they should have the attitude that they can have some control, some say over their own lives, their own destiny, if they get out and participate. Some people should say, you know, people died. They bled and died for this right. People lost jobs. People were evicted from the farm, from the plantation. People were jailed. And in a lot of places, people tell you how to vote, and that we don't tell people how you vote. Just get out there and vote. It's my conviction if people turn out and vote, like they should, they would make the right decision.
We were together earlier today, and you were talking about how there's less bipartisanship in Washington than there used to be. It's harder to work across the aisles. This seems like a good place to ask about that. How do you think that's affected voting rights?
Well, if we had more, had a greater sense of community, even in the Congress, I think there would be more people supporting a Voting Rights Act or to fixing the Voting Rights Act. I'm convinced, and I don't want to be partisan at all, but I'm convinced if we had an act on the floor of the House, on my side of the aisle, the great majority of the members will vote for it. And if our leadership come together on both sides, maybe, just maybe, a growing majority on the other side will vote for it. The last time we fixed the Voting Rights Act, it was a unanimous vote on the Senate side, and just a handful of people voted against it on the House side. We can do it again. We had the leadership of Senator Kennedy and others, and we can do it again.
This is slightly off topic, but I have to ask you about this. What does it mean to you to see the Confederate flag come down in South Carolina?
It was very moving. It was very moving to see it come down. The flag is a symbol of division, a symbol of separation. When some of the people that were beating us on the bridge on March 7, 1965, they had the symbol, the flag, on their helmet. I think it represents our dark past. We need to go forward, not stand still, and not go backward. I was in Alabama this weekend, and I was very moved by seeing all along some of the highways in rural Alabama with people flying the American flag. And there was one sign under the American flag that said, "This is the right thing to do."
You've been back to Selma many times. What's it like now? How's it changed?
The fear is gone. People are no longer afraid. There's a greater sense of community. You have a biracial city government. One of our colleagues in the Congress, young African-American woman, represents Selma in the Congress. 50 years ago, that would have been impossible. She attended high school there, went off to Princeton and to Harvard. Now she's a sitting member of Congress. It says something about the distance we've come and the progress
something about the effect you've had, sir.
Well, the only thing I did, I just tried
Something to you.
I just tried to help out. Yeah, I just tried to help out. But other people did much more. These are the people that live in Selma day in and day out. These are people who lived in fear.
I want to ask you about your dear friend, Senator Kennedy. You were in the Senate gallery, the original one, in 2006 for the reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act. Talk to me a little bit about your relationship and about his role in the civil rights movement.
First of all, I must tell you, I love Senator Kennedy. He was a wonderful human being, just a good person, good human being. He visited, when I first ran for Congress, he came to Atlanta, came to our home. I served on the SCLC board, Dr. King board. When I was 22 years old, he invited me to come on the board of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference as a liaison between the students and the adults. And from time to time, Senator Kennedy would come and speak at the convention of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He came to Jackson, Mississippi, I remember. Came to Atlanta more than once, in other parts of the South. But the last time we renewed the Voting Rights Act, Senator Kennedy invited me to come to the Florida Senate. And he gave me a copy of the tally card. And to follow how people were voting. It was amazing, and we had an unbelievable discussion. He took and showed me the deaths that Lyndon Johnson used to sign the Voting Rights Act in 1965. He was our shepherd, as I've said before. He was our leader. I miss him. We worked together.
I'd like to open it up for questions from the audience now. We have a little bit of time left. Don't be shy.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you, of course, for coming. I'm a big follower of history and study civil rights at UMass, and I had the privilege of going to Howard Law and kind of just follow the movement. And I just want to hear from someone like you who knew Dr. King to just kind of give authentic, this is what he was like, if you can.
Well, Martin Luther King Jr. was a wonderful, wonderful man. Sometimes we see him as someone speaking at the March on Washington on August 28, 1963, maybe during the march on May 17, 1957. But he was a wonderful human being in terms, he loved young people. He was so proud and so happy when young people started sitting in at lunch counters and restaurants. He knew his message of nonviolence, direct action, was getting over. But he also was a man who would tell jokes, and just, he thought the jokes were so funny, he would laugh at his own jokes. I remember one time we were traveling someplace in Alabama, and there was a hole in the wall, little restaurant. And he said, why don't we stop here and get something to eat? If we get arrested and go to jail, we'll go on a full stomach. And he just laughed about it. Nobody, except Dr. King, wanted to stop there, so we didn't stop. He would ask me from time to time, John, do you still preach? Because he knew that when I was a little boy, I used to talk to the chickens and preach to the chicken. Now, and I was Dr. King, when I'm taking a shower, I preach. He just thought it was funny. I told some young people earlier, Dr. King invited me to come to Montgomery to meet with him. I sent him a letter in 1957. I wanted to attend Troy State College, now known as Troy University, school 10 miles from my home. And I traveled there. A young lawyer by the name of Fred Gray, who was a lawyer for Rosa Parks and Dr. King, became our lawyer during the Freedom Rides and during the march from Selma to Montgomery. Met me at the Greyhound bus station and drove me to the First Baptist Church in Montgomery, pastored by the Reverend Ralph Abernathy, a colleague of Dr. King. And when I walked in, he said, are you the boy from Troy? Are you John Lewis? And I said, Dr. King, I am John Robert Lewis. So he didn't say anything about my name, but he started calling me the boy from Troy. And that's what he referred to. Hi is the boy from Troy. He didn't think any good thing could come out of Troy.
Yes.
Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and now as an NAACP leader, one of the many in the room, I always thought it interesting, the story about the March on Washington and your voice in the mix of all those other leaders, and really the challenges that you faced internally around the tone and the language of your remarks at the march, and even some of the internal battles with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Can you talk a lot about not only challenging discriminatory policies and practices and laws, but then even fighting internally to move us in the right direction?
Well, I think you saw some of that in the movie, Selma. While I was working on my March on Washington speech with some of my colleagues in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, have been reading a copy of the New York Times, and I saw a group of black women in Southern Africa carrying signs saying, "One man, one vote." So in the speech, I said something like, "One man, one vote is the African cry. It is ours too. It must be ours." So that became a slogan within the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. We had buttons saying, "One man, one vote." Some people didn't like some of the words that were in my proposed speech at the March on Washington. They thought they were a little extreme, a little radical, but I thought that they represented the people that we were speaking for. People working in the Delta of Mississippi, the Black Belt of Alabama, in Southwest Georgia. And part of the speech said we must seek more than civil rights, but to build a beloved community. I'm not sure I used the phrase, but it was to build a sense of community, that we're all in this thing together. But down near the end of the speech, the people got sort of concerned about, even before then. I said, "You tell us to wait. You tell us to be patient. We cannot wait. We cannot be patient. We want our freedom and we want it now." And Bud Rustin, who was working with A. Philip Randolph, one of the leaders of the morning, said, "John, you can't use that." Many people in the religious community have believe in being patient. So he was just, I think he was playing with me. But anyway, so we got that in and we kept that in. But near the end of the speech, I said something like, "If we do not see this is in the original text, if we do not see meaningful progress here today, the day may come when we will not confine our marching on Washington. We may be forced to march through the South the way Sherman did, nonviolently." And Dr. King said, "Oh, John, that doesn't sound like you." And so we met behind Mr. Lincoln. The music was already playing. So Mr. Randolph and Dr. King came to me, and Mr. Randolph said, "You know, I've been planning, I've been waiting for this moment, this time," because he wanted to march against Roosevelt and against Truman. And so Dr. King and Randolph kept saying, "Can we change this? We come this far together. Let's stay together for the sake of unity." And so we made the change. I couldn't say no to A. Philip Randolph. I couldn't say no to Martin Luther King Jr., two men that I love and admire. But you go back to Selma. The executive secretary of SNCC, a guy by the name of James Former, and other SNCC people opposed the march from Selma to Montgomery. We stayed up all night in a little restaurant in Atlanta, arguing whether we should march or not. I go into Selma. I got arrested and jailed there quite a few times. I knew so many of the people. They wanted to march, and I said, "If they're going to march, I'm going to march with them." They said, in effect, if you're going to march, you march as John Lewis, but not as the national chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. So later that night or early that morning, around 3 or 4 o'clock, I jumped in a car with two SNCC staffers of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. We took our sleeping bags. We made it to Selma. And we slept in what we call the Freedom House on the floor in our sleeping bag. We got up the next morning, got dressed, went to the little church, Brown Chapel AME Church, and participated in the service. We came out of the church, conducted a nonviolent workshop, and the young former member of Congress, not at that time, but on Dr. King's staff, later became our ambassador to the United Nations, gave a prayer, and they appealed to me to march with Jose as one of the leaders of the march. But my organization, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, was not going to be supportive. But after we were beaten and left bloody and almost dead, they decided to support the march. Sometimes you have to go with your gut and do what you think is fair and right and just. And that's what I did.
Did you ever have any doubts, any second thoughts while you were getting arrested 40 times and going through all these horrible experiences?
Well, I got arrested 40 times during the 60s, and I've been arrested 5 times since I've been in Congress.
Sounds like no.
And the very last arrest was trying to get the Speaker of the House to bring to the floor a comprehensive immigration bill, the same one that the Senate had passed. If the Speaker had brought it, almost every single person on our side of the aisle would have voted for it, and we would have comprehensive immigration reform now. Sometimes you have to find a way to dramatize the issue, to make it real, make it plain. When I would go to Ebenezer Church in Atlanta when I first moved there 52 years ago, as chair of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Martin Luther King Jr. would be preaching the sermon, and his father, that we call Daddy King, would say, make it plain, son, make it plain. And I think from time to time you have to make it plain, make it real.
By the way, I'd just like to mention in passing, I believe you are the last living speaker from that day in '63, the March on Washington. Is that correct?
Yes, I am the last person who spoke on that day.
Of what the implications of the case will be that's currently being heard in North Carolina on the voting rights bill?
Well, if we get to a ruling that the civil rights forces and voting rights forces in North Carolina design, I think it would set something in motion. It probably will be appealed by the state of North Carolina, and it could go back to the United States Supreme Court. But North Carolina is trying to take people back. In the number of days that you have for early voting. A lot of places don't want people to vote on Sunday.
We have a question from a student in the...
How you doing, sir?
Fine, sir. How are you?
I'm doing good.
Good.
I'm kind of nervous. I'm not going to lie to you. My name is Torrey Johnson. I'm from Regis College. I go to Regis College. And my question for you is, what are some strong leadership skills that I can use in order to be a successful leader like yourself?
I could simply say, sir, just go with the force. You see something that is not right, not fair, not just, find a way to say, I'm going to do what I can to change things. You could, you know, I was inspired by Martin Luther King Jr., by Rosa Parks, by the teaching of Gandhi, that the way of love, the way of peace, the way of nonviolence is a better way. When I would be sitting at a lunch counter in a restaurant in downtown Nashville during the 60s, maybe a reporter would walk up and say, are you one of the leaders? I didn't try to deny my role as in the movement, but I would say, I'm just one of the participants. Because in a real sense, we had group leadership. We all have to find a way, a role that we can play best. Continue to get the best possible education. And follow the dictates of your conscience. And be prepared to stand up, and speak out. When I was growing up in rural Alabama, I've always heard my mother say something, and I didn't understand what she was saying. She would say, be particular. She would say, be mindful, be careful. And sometime I'd be out there working in the field, and she would say, boy, you're falling behind. You need to catch up. And I would say, Mom, this is hard work. And she would say, hard work never kill anybody. I said, well, it's about to kill me. And so we all have to work hard. And don't take anything for granted. And we just have to be, as I said earlier to someone today, we all have to find a way to be a little more human. Be kind, be thoughtful, never become bitter, never become hostile. Keep the faith. It all will work out.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Go for it.
Congressman.
What's going on?
First of all, good evening and thank you for coming. I am originally from Selma, Alabama. Very proud to say that. And I know Terry Sewell personally. You were talking about her earlier this evening. My question is, have you thought about running a national movement against the suppression of the right to vote? There should be a national movement, not just one state, but all across the nation, so that everyone is aware of what is going on and why people are dragging their feet in terms of the suppression of the right to vote. It's very dear to me. I did not participate in the march because I was in college at the time. And my mother was very happy that I wasn't there because I would have been too outspoken. And she thought that I would have been hit over the head like you were hit over the head. I would have been nonviolent, but I would not have kept my mouth shut. So I just want to know from you if you have considered a national movement for the suppression, against the suppression of the right to vote. Thank you.
Well, there's several organizations and groups that will be meeting in Atlanta on August 4th, 2 days before the 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, 50 years ago. We'll be planning and mapping ways to support the pending legislation. So people are ready, they're organizing, they're mobilizing. 7 national organizations are meeting at their convention during the summer. They're taking positions. I think we're going to see it. Hopefully, the Congress will come together and do something.
I'm sorry to say that we're out of time. Hour's gone very quickly. One more.
Yeah, this young lady.
Yes. Go for it.
Let's get the mic.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Names we don't know
Yeah.
and are unheralded in history. And I was wondering if you could speak to the role that women played in the movement and maybe give us a homework assignment of some women that we should learn more about.
Well, that's important. You're raising an unbelievable question, and I've always said it, that women never received the credit that they deserve. The idea, you go back to Rosa Parks talking about the modern day civil rights movement. We could go much further back. But there was a teacher at Alabama State College named Joanne Robertson that suggested there be a boycott of the buses. And she got students in her class to stay up one of her classes, to stay up all night using paper. You know, you get 500 sheets of rim of paper, they cut them in half, I don't know how many rims they used, but it was the young people, the young men that she organized, these young male students, to go to different parts of the city of Montgomery to distribute Stay Off the Buses. That started the fight for the boycott. And that's another woman that, I know there's a house here in Boston called the Ella Baker House, right?
Yes, sir.
If it hadn't been for Ella Baker, this woman who was born in North Carolina, attended Shaw University, worked for the YWCA many years in New York. She worked for the NAACP. Then she came to work for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. She was a little older, but she was young at heart and really radical. She became like the mother of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And she inspired us to stand up, to speak up, and speak out. She never received the credit. She was the one that called together the meeting Easter weekend, April 1960, at the school that she graduated from, where the temporary Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was born. Then the second meeting took place in October 1960 on the campus of Morehouse College in Atlanta. And the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was no longer the temporary organization, but became a permanent organization. And the late mayor of Washington, D.C. was the first national chairman, Marion Barry, who in 1960 testified before the Democratic Convention and the Republican Convention on behalf of the students during the early days of the Civil Rights Movement. A young lady named Gloria Richardson in Cambridge, Maryland. Diane Nash, who played in the movie, Selma. She was the head of the Nashville student movement. She was charming, and she held people together, students from Fisk University, Tennessee State, American Baptist College, Meharry Medical School, and Vanderbilt and Peabody in Nashville. It was black and white college students. So all across the South, all across America, you had brave and courageous women. And there was a woman who was a great lawyer who worked for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, pointed to the bench in New York. Somebody should help me with the name. Constable Baker Motley. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. She was so brave and so courageous for a black woman to come south and go into those courtrooms in Alabama and Georgia and Mississippi. It was dangerous. There were sheriffs that beat people, beat male lawyers who were trying to defend people, getting people out of jail. What would they do with a woman? So brave and courageous women. Another woman was Ruby Hurley, who was the head of the regional office of the NAACP. Daisy Bates in Little Rock, Arkansas. It's a good story. It's a good work assignment for somebody to get out there, write a book, do the study, really. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Kids. After you. Thank
Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Congressman. Certainly, we've seen a great leader of our nation, and it makes us have to step to the plate and be the leaders of the future. Please come again to the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for these kinds of programs.